The martial arts in America, rich in lore and legend. A fighting art replete with both master and mystic. The history of American martial arts is a fascinating journal of fact and fantasy. What was it really like to fight bare knuckle, fist to face, foot to flesh? In recalling the American martial arts scene of the 1960s, one label has been embraced by the gladiators of the time that separates them from generations to follow: blood and guts. Blood and guts, like some mysterious alloy whose ingredients are shared only by the fighters of a special time. A password into an elite club that recognized tenacity, power, and the warrior spirit above all. Those of us not belonging to the club could only speculate or fantasize about what it was like to compete at the highest level against the best fighters in the toughest tournament of the time. Until now.
Hi everybody, I'm John Graydon. In 1968, Jim Harrison created an event that in many ways defined the blood and guts era. A hard contact, bare knuckle, invitational point karate event with 6 of the country's top fighters. Jim originally shot the event as a television pilot, but the tape was lost and hasn't been viewed in 30 years, until now. Joining me to share his unique perspective on this event is one of the event's participants, Mr. Joe Lewis, the man named the greatest fighter in the history of karate. Joe, welcome back to the 1968 World Championships. It's an interesting retrospective, but let's set the stage. It's 1968. Vietnam War is going. It's the age of Aquarius. It's an interesting, turmoil-ridden time in our country. Are we seeing this in the martial arts? What was the state of the sport at the time?
Let me give you a couple of chronological things. First of all, the sport is still relatively new. 1967, April issue of Black Belt magazine, we had created the first rating system. I listed the top 10 fighters in America, of which we're getting ready to see a number of them compete. Allenstein, who was one of them, was one of the judges and referees. Pat Burleson, David Moon, myself, Fred Wynn, and Skipper Mullins. And I had just come off of a lucky win. I just recently won the United States Karate Championships in Dallas, Texas. Matter of fact, 2 days before this particular event. The big tournaments at that time, and there weren't many of them, maybe about 4 a year. You had the International Karate Championships, which was the major tournament. You had the United States Karate Championships, which was promoted by Allenstein. You had the International Karate Championships. Then you had Robert Trius's USKA Grand Nationals. Then, of course, you had the Amateur World Karate Championships. So Mr. Harrison, Jim Harrison, had this idea of putting the sport on national television. What better way of doing it than to televise an event, get a group of the top fighters in the country to come up and compete, and call it the first professional world championships. And to make it possible, you got to get the top fighters. Chuck Norris was somewhat injured at that time, and he couldn't make this particular event, but he did get a good cross-section of a number of the top fighters. At that time, what you saw in most tournaments, you would see most matches would be 2 minutes long, which were the old Japanese rules. They would go by primarily killing techniques, not necessarily what was called killing techniques.
The lethal blows of karate. I know later in the program we're going to actually see the point demonstration by Jim Harrison, which is very unique to the time and exciting to see. But here we have 6 of the top fighters in the country. My first night in karate, February 12th, 1974, on the way to karate, I picked up the 2nd issue of Professional Karate magazine. I still have it. It is dog-eared, it's beaten up, but I knew every one of these fighters. I studied these guys, and for years I kind of fantasized about, what was the fighting really like? And this was one of the biggest tournaments that it received a lot of PR. It wasn't necessarily a big event, but it received a lot of PR. What was unique about this event?
It was the first.
When you say first, what do you mean?
The first time outside of having a tournament of champions where you get a unique body of the top fighters together. You erase all of the second-generation fighters. You just get the top boys fighting. It's unique that it's been televised, okay? Because ABC had televised the National Championships in 1965 when Mike Stone had turned it into a bloodbath, and all the networks, ABC, CBS, and NBC, every one of them said, that's it, we're banning the sport forever. And so it was real hard to get it back on national TV.
So Jim Harrison took it upon himself to finance this venture. We do want to recognize and thank Mr. Harrison for contributing this tape to the Martial Arts Professional Magazine archives. And let's go back to 1968. Let's meet the fighters. Joe, who are these guys?
Professional karate, the country's fastest growing and most exciting sport, featuring the top black belt karate personalities in the United States. I'm Fred Everett, and this is Jim Harrison, who will provide the blow-by-blow description of this week's exciting matches. Behind us, you see the 6 participants warming up.
First fight here is Fred Wynn, a Korean stylist. Real mean in the ring. He'd love to go for full contact, even though it was a point tournament. Look for blood from him. Like, this is me, boy. I look kind of young then. At least I had a nose. My favorite techniques, of course, is the old deadly side kick I use. I used to love the grab. I work my right hand underneath and then a chop over the top. David Moon, really one of the all-time top fighters, especially in the top 10. Fabulous kicks. He could jump kick, he could attack, or he could counter. Bob Wall, an Okinawa Tay stylist, trained under me. Good sidekick, very aggressive, always likes to get off first.
1967 World Championships.
Pat Burleson, Texas fighter, Korean stylist. He is our grandfather of point fighting karate. Vicious, gets wild, hits you with the hands, or get you underneath with the kicks. Skipper Mullins, Texas fighter. Excellent kicks, real good speed, especially in this right leg. Again, he gets you that right side kick, right round kick, or come over the top with a right chop. Won a lot of tournaments in his lifetime, one of the all-time greats.
Now, Jim, if you'll step over there and give the instructions to this week's fighters.
Gentlemen, your matches will be 3 minutes long. It's a 2 1/2 minute period. Your timekeeper, Ned Day, will stand and give you Sanju, Jikan, which means you have 30 seconds of time left to warn you towards the end of the point. Techniques will be counted any vital area, from the groin to the face. Fist techniques are counted will be the 4 fist, striking in, face, any area that's delivered to a vital area. Bottom fist, Teitui techniques. Backhand, Uraken, back knuckles, open hand techniques. Shotai to the face, Shuto to any other part of the body. Techniques with the feet will count. Ball of the foot, striking to the body area or to the face area. If actually striking to the face area, please do not use the ball of the foot, but use the top of the foot. Just enough for the referee to hear it without injuring your man. On heel techniques, in the body area, you can bring those in with a little bit of force. You try not to do injury, try not to break anything. If you're throwing a heel technique to the face in a hooking manner, without hitting with the heel, if you'll reach back and kind of slap with the bottom of the foot, this indicates to the referee that you could have hit the man with the heel, you could have killed him, but you didn't. Are there any questions?
We'll introduce the referees and begin the first match after this important message.
One of the interesting aspects, Joe, of the fights we're going to see is the use of the open hand, the deadly karate chops, the ridge hands, the palm heels, the claws. This was much more prevalent, obviously, in the days before gloves.
Yeah, a lot of what we're going to see is a single technique and a stop. You're not going to see the follow-through combinations. I remember 1969 International Karate Championships. I'm fighting one of Funio DeMuro's top black belts for the finals. And Pat Burleson came up and told me, try a right front round kick and then come over the top of the chop. I went right out of that very first technique, hip fake right chop right on top and one. You could break some of these guys, like even Jim Harrison could do it those days with a shuto chop, so it was a great technique.
Well, it's an unfortunate aspect of the arts that's been lost in the competition, but is preserved with the video of the World Championships that we're enjoying. Let's go back to 1968 with Jim Harrison ringside.
Jim, we have 3 officials for today's matches. Would you introduce them, please?
Yes, standing in the middle, Mr. Robert Trias from Phoenix, Arizona, the director of the United States Karate Association. On his right, in the gray uniform, Mr. Louis Angel from Tulsa, Oklahoma, who's the director of the regional division of the Goju Karate Association. In the white uniform on Mr. Trias' left is Alan Steen, the director of the Taekwondo Federation for the regional division. Also, the 1966 and 67 All-American champion and international champion. The players now saluted to the officials. They're saluting to each other. Judges are taking their place. Boys are taking their stance. They have the signal to go. They're both fighting out of Shiko Dachi, a low straddle stance. Skip Mullen attack with a side thrust kick. Pat moves back and blocks. Pat attacks with a chop. Skip tries to counter. A roundhouse kick to the head. Chops delivered to the back of Skip's shoulder. It wasn't counted as a point. Once again, Pat chases Skip out of the area. The area is about 20 feet. Skip starts to move in for a jump side kick. Pat anticipates and moves out of the way. Skip attacks with a roundhouse kick to the head. Pat threw a Mawashi-giri roundhouse kick in. Mr. Trias is calling a point for Mawashi-giri for a roundhouse kick for Mr. Burleson. Mr. Steen's raising the white flag. You notice Mr. Burleson is not wearing any sash on his belt. He's had 1 point scored. 1 point has been scored for Mr. Burleson. Pat Burleson moves in, jams Skip's leg. He's got 2 white flags from the 2 referees. He scored with a chop. They salute. Winner of the match, Pat Burleson, Fort Worth, Texas.
Very, very.
Joe, it seemed to me that Skipper Mullins may have been a little intimidated by the larger, more experienced Pat Burleson.
Skipper's usually a little more aggressive. He's got that real good lead right leg. He used to work quite a bit throwing kicks with that thing in his school down in Texas. He looked a little passive. Obviously, very quickly in the match, the momentum shifted in Burleson's favor. He was definitely psyched out. You could see it in his attitude, his whole demeanor. And Burleson had his number.
Seems that every time that Burleson was driving forward, Mullins would have 1 kick or 1 technique and basically collapse.
Yeah, and of course, at that time, later he developed his hands, but at that time you could see he wasn't punching. When Burleson got in close to utilize the inside game, that the punching distance Mullins was kind of lost.
And we did see the round kick chop you described earlier. So it's validated.
A couple of times.
So a couple of times. Let's go back to ringside with Jim Harrison.
Who's fighting our second match?
Our second match will be Bob Wall from Los Angeles and David Moon from Korea. David's now in Texas. He's been living in Lubbock, Texas for 5 years, but he studied and attained his 3rd-degree black belt in Korea before coming to the United States.
I see.
Mr. Steen is now the referee. He's bowed the 2 players in, going towards each other. They're taking a stance. If you notice, David fights very light. Bob Wall attacks with a side thrust kick twice. David has moved back and fight. Point's been called by the referees. David threw a Mawashi-giri left roundhouse kick. White flags are up for David since Bob's wearing a white flag. Mr. Steen's awarding the point to David. Roundhouse kick to the kidneys. David's been forced out of the area once. If he's forced out of the area unnecessarily 3 times, a point will be called against him. Both men are fighting out of a side straddle stance. Another attack. Point called for a Teitui, bottom fist to the temple of Bob Wall. All 3 referees verify it. The point's awarded. The gentlemen bow out. David Moon, the winner of round 2.
Joe, I think in all fairness to Bob Wall, we have to recognize that he had just made black belt fighting David Moon. A lot of our viewers are going to recognize Bob Wall playing the famed O'Hara role in Bruce Lee's classic Enter the Dragon, but this was very early in his fighting career.
Yes, he did end up in his day, on a better day, of course, breaking a lot of ribs with that side kick. You might notice that side straddle stance he's using, which he got from me, and of course, Bruce Lee, in my opinion, copied it from me and used it in a lot of his movies. Bob's problem here, of course, is He's got a tremendous amount of determination, strong heart, but the technique's a little weak, mainly because although he is trying to get off first and he's beat David to the draw, since he's out of range, when you squeeze the trigger on that side kick, he's off balance. And end of it, David Moon takes advantage of him being off balance, ends up scoring two good, easily scored counter techniques.
Up against a very experienced David Moon. Let's go back ringside with Jim Harrison for a fight that I think you may find a little familiar.
And it looks as if the matches are ready to get underway.
Looks like Mr. Angel's now bowing them in. Lewis and Wren are bowing to each other. Lewis is more or less a passive fighter. He usually waits for his man to come to him. Fred Wren attacks with a yoko-гэri spin back kick. Joe Lewis counterattacks with his famous side kick. Points been awarded. Fred's fighting out of a left stance. He's advanced against Joe again. The boys have come into a clinch. Several techniques were thrown at that time. I don't think the referee has awarded a point. No points scored at all. Fred's fighting a very low shikodachi. Joe seems to be moving in, ready to press him. Fred's bobbing, he's attacking. Throws a spinning hook kick to Joe's head. Joe moves back out of the way again. Fred dropped his knee at that one time. In a karate match, if a man falls, it's quite ethical to go in and attack him. It's one of the best places to score a point. Mr. Angel asking for verification of any point for referees. The kick was considered a little bit too low. Joe's moving in and pressing. Fred's moving back out of the way slightly.
To be a point, it would have to be of a disabling nature in the referee's opinion, even though the blow was full.
That's right. The point will have to be delivered to a vital area of the body. It has to show enough force, speed, target area, and everything to have been a crippling or a killing blow, and yet not been thrown with full contact. It must be pulled short, short enough not to do injury. Mr. Lewis advances as Fred Wren advances. He throws a right sake in, reverse punch, kidney area. He's been awarded the points by both. The referee awards Mr. Lewis a match. These are two of the strongest players in the States today. Last two times I fought Fred for overall championship, and Fred was giving me one of the roughest matches I've ever had.
Well, we just saw sort of a replay between Mr. Wren and Mr. Lewis of something that's been happening, and the competition is really strong. Yet, as you could see there at the end of the match, both participants, Lewis ruffling Wren's hair and feeling pretty good about the whole thing.
When you're fighting out there, you don't have a friend in the world, especially that man that's across the deck from you.
I kind of noticed that.
After it's over with, well, everybody's buddy-buddy again.
Joe, when I watch this fight, two things come to mind very quickly. One is the speed of your side kick, and two is the power. And when I say power, it's not aggressive forward power. It's your defensive side kick is so quick, but it's very powerful, and you stick it and stay. You don't fall away at all.
There's two things I'm doing here. One point I want to make is I became very deadly with my back knuckle later during this year because of my work with Bruce Lee. However, this is pre-Bruce Lee time, and you're not seeing it a lot. Two things I'm doing well here are, number one is the range. I'm playing the range game very well, making them take a slight step before they can pop me with a kick or a punch. And I have a choice at that point. If they hesitate, I can beat them to the draw, nail them with the side kick, using real good timing. Or if they squeeze the trigger first, it gives me enough time, because of that range, to catch them with a low defensive side kick. I'll catch them coming or going either way.
Let's review some of the action.
See the range just where he has to step to get me. I got enough time to take a half step back. Fire the counter side kick.
Fire, I think, is a good word, because that thing just zooms in there like a piston.
Range, see the range, I choke up. He has to lunge to get to me. It slows down his initial move. I want to take him to the ground there. I decided not to.
Well, let's talk about that for just a little bit. You guys clash, you punch the body, you chop to the neck, and then it seems he came back with a little elbow strike.
I don't know what he's doing. I did know his defense was a little weak. I had sparred him the day before this, kind of warming up. I always felt he was easy to hit. Most of those Texas fighters in those days were all offense, no defense. So you just play him a touch out of range.
So there's a good example of it with the defensive side kick and then the follow-up side kick as he tries to regain his feet. Well, this is a hard jamming blitz, and we're seeing the chop again.
What's happening is he started to come in. I come underneath with a punch, going back over the top with a chop, then back underneath for the insurance punch.
And then hand back to the hip like you're doing.
Actually, it's a three-point counter.
Joe, with your win over Fred Wren, we enter the second round. We have you left, Pat Burleson, and David Moon. Let's go back with Jim Harrison ringside.
Mr. Burleson receiving the flag from the referee. The boys are rather concentrating, get their minds ready.
That's Burleson with the red flag this time.
Red flag and a black uniform. David Moon wearing the typical Taekwondo or Korean gi with the black bands around the outside of the uniform, the white uniform. Mr. Trias has bowed the two gentlemen in. Both of these men fight with almost identical style. They're very, very stylish and very light on their feet, even though their weight is 140 and 200 pounds. Pat's slightly more the aggressive player.
Notice Moon reacting as a blow.
The referees had to pull him to start. Right, Moon usually will deceptively move away as you start your blow, making you fall just short of your blow and then trying to counter.
What got the point for Burleson?
He scored a reverse punch to the kidney area. Started in with a chop. David tries a sweeping area. Sweeping technique. If you can sweep a man's foot, make him lose his balance, then move and attack him while he's down on the deck or while he's off balance. It didn't work. Not that time. Pat's a little light, very light-legged. On that last, David fights in a rather bouncing manner. It's nothing to look up and see David about 3 feet over your head coming down with a foot in your face. Pat lost his balance. David goes up and over, and he tries to come in. Pat catches his leg and spins him. Referees are moving both of the boys back. They bow in again. No point scored that time. Mr. Burleson has a point for a punch. Actually, he scored with a chop and a punch. David countered with a sake-in, forward punching technique with the solar plexus. He's been awarded points by the two judges. The referees are getting verification from the two judges for the punch.
A tie match.
Now have 1 point apiece. Now it gets very, very tense.
From a time, there's nothing else.
David got a jump side kick up into the kidney area, the rib area. It looked very high. Pat's down. It looks like the way Pat's holding. Pat can take a tremendous amount of pain. He might possibly have a broken rib. Mr. Lippman,
Will you... Breathing with a little difficulty at the moment. We do have a doctor on hand. The doctor currently moving into the area, and I'm sure that everything is going to be all right. Pat, as you say, has demonstrated a tremendous ability in the past to be able to take an awful lot of punishment. And that was quite a kick, though.
It really was. David caught him with a full heel. He was trying to catch Pat as Pat moved away, and he's extended a little bit further than necessary.
So David Moon will be advancing, and we'll take a look at our round-robin scoreboard on professional karate in just a moment.
I mentioned earlier that on my first night in karate, I purchased an issue of Professional Karate magazine. One of the things that really surprised me was that they had weight divisions. See, I was 14 years old, and to me, the whole purpose of karate was that the little guy could beat the big guy. So it didn't make sense to me that they actually had weight divisions, but here we're actually seeing a 140-pound David Moon breaking the ribs of a 200-pound Pat Burleson with a beautiful jump side kick.
I like his strategy there. David's playing that cat and mouse game. What you're trying to do is get the big man off balance, get him fluttered, get him flustered where he can't focus. He's got Burleson lunging at him. He's kind of working what we call an entrapment game. He's luring Pat sort of into the trap.
So here we see, as you described, the entrapment. Moon's playing a good distancing game, and here's a little prelude as to what happened with the beautiful jump side kick. Blocked at that time, he's going to get him.
What's interesting here is watch when they spar how low their hands are, both of them. That's a great jump stomp. They didn't call it for some reason, something we don't see in today's fights.
It's interesting that fighting back then had a much more self-defense theme to it with the open hands and the flying stomps.
A lot of it had to do with the excessive use of the low groin kicks. You need your hands low to defend against that.
We couldn't see that very clearly. That was a good punch by David Moon. Moon comes back after scoring the reverse punch to the body with a beautiful faking jump back fist and then the jump side kick right underneath the shoulder into the armpit, breaking Pat Burleson's ribs and pulling him out of the tournament.
You know, I was amazed that little David Moon broke big Pat Burleson's ribs. I mean, they took a long time to sit there and tape his ribs up. I was shocked.
It pulled Pat Burleson right out of the event, which left basically you versus David Moon. So we have the 140-pound high-flying kicker who just took the other biggest guy in the event out of it, and you're getting ready to fight him. What's going through your mind?
Well, I knew David Moon was a top fighter in those days. When I talked to Mike Stone the year before, Mike Stone always rated David Moon in the top 10 or the top 5. He was a pretty consistent winner. He was hard to beat. He had a good sense of time and a good sense of range, a little weak on the defense. Hopefully I could capitalize on that.
There's a lot of build-up to this final fight. Let's go ringside with Jim Harrison at the first World Professional Championships in 1968 Grand Championship match.
Mr. Trias is our head referee this time. He brings the boys to the position. They bow to the referee. They're saluting to each other. Fighting out of the same stance. This means both fighters fighting out of the same direction. These boys are both very strategical fighters.
They're watching the eyes, they're watching the hands, they're watching the feet all at the same time. There's some kind of a break, some kind of a reaction.
They're trying to feint each other out to make the other man to defend something that isn't coming, or to expect something else. Lewis advances, side thrust kick into the kidney area. Seems to hurt David a little bit. Two judges have a red flag up since Lewis is wearing the red sash on his belt. David's trying to catch his breath. Joe caught me with that side kick in the internationals this year.
Naturally.
It goes in deep.
Naturally, these fellows try to pull those blows as much as possible, but I suppose it's only natural that the spirit of mind that they're in, there's going to be some damage done.
Well, they're trying to deliver the point before the man can defend or get away from it, and it's really hard to control that close. So back. Joe shuffling forward, using a creeping motion, shuffling from heel to toe. David's moving back. David's changed his stance, so he keeps away from it. Joe advances again. He fakes with a hand. He grabs and throws the side kick in again. Angel and Steen indicate the point. The point's been awarded to Lewis, the winner of the match. Two side kicks.
It's fascinating to me that in watching David Moon the previous two fights, he was all over the place. He was playing a distance game. He was mobile. He was everywhere. Against you, he froze. What happened?
He did freeze. I'm basically in my zone now. I'm just starting getting warmed up. I'm going back to my old self, and that is just square off, find the range, squeeze the trigger, fight's over. Here I'm choking up, trying to find a range. I'm trying to reach that impulse hits me where the mind sort of goes blank, goes in its zen state, and then it just automatically triggers the kick. Boom, straight up underneath the arm. He had no defense.
According to Jim Harrison, that kick actually broke his ribs. As you'll see in the next clash that he turns the other side forward.
It does look like he's a little out of breath here, doesn't it? Yeah, there's something wrong with David, you know.
He starts with the left side forward and then he switches, I think, to protect that rib.
Again, just setting up, finding the range, waiting for the impulse to hit me, boom. It's one of my old favorite moves to grab the guy's lead hand, especially when they wore those gi tops where the sleeve came all the way down to the wrist. That's not practical at all. It's too easy to grab. You notice the gi I have on is that kendo top. One of the reasons we wear that is to show off the size of the forearms, intimidate the opponent, make it difficult for someone to grab your sleeves. That's real karate.
Major part of the legend of Joe Lewis, of course, is that wicked side kick.
You know, on the very first tournament I ever fought in California, the International Championships, one of the toughest men I ever fought. All I did was side kick, side kick, side kick. At the end of the match, the judges came up to me and said, "Mr. Lewis, why is that all you throw us a side kick?" I said, "Why not? They can't block it." And they said, "Yeah, I guess you're right." My first tournament ever, 1966, United States National Championships. The first man to ever score a point on me. It was the last match, the Grand Championship match. I'd stepped out of the ring, made a mistake, to turn my back, look where I was, and he scored a point on me. I was mad. So I came back, we squared off, locked horns. I did a simple technique, reaching, grabbed his sleeve, lifted his arm up, side kick in the match.
Same technique that finished David Moon off and gave you the Grand Championship of the first World Professional Championships. This was actually a paid purse, and how big was that purse?
$1. But he did it on camera. He said he wanted to make a point that this is the first time a person had ever been paid for a tournament match. I had been paid for exhibitions before, but never for a tournament.
Well, we've heard the comments from Joe Lewis in 1998. Let's go back to 1968 and hear 23-year-old Joe Lewis's observations as winning the first World Championships.
Jim, come on over here for a minute, Joe. Congratulations.
Thank you.
From professional
Good sidekick,
karate.
Joe.
Thank you.
Beautiful, beautiful job. And of course, it made a quick match out of something that we were looking, you know, might go just a little bit longer.
I want to explain something. David Moon's a very fast man and a very good counterman. So what I wanted to do was to play him close and boom, try to use my speed against his speed. In other words, I feel I'm a bigger man and a little bit stronger, and therefore I'd use my force and my size against his speed. Boom.
He's a very quick fellow, though.
Oh, yes, definitely.
Jim, your analysis of the match that we just saw.
I think Joe usually plays a little more passive game. He waits for his fighter to come to him. And this might have kind of fouled David's strategy up a little bit. And unless you've been standing on the end of Joe's sidekick, it looks pretty fast from the audience.
Sure
But
did.
he and I were warming up in the United States Championships one time, and I made up my mind I was going to block it. And I opened up my side, and he kicked me, and I blocked.
Joe,
In that order.
how many titles, how many credits do you currently have, major tournament credits?
8 titles right at the present.
8.
Yes.
And of course, you're not about to retire or leave the sport or anything
No,
else.
I got to repay somebody for all these scars on my face now. He's #1.
Is he? Tell us about somebody else that might be on your mind right now in that connection.
Well, we have some top boys out in Los Angeles. Mr. Chuck Norris, who's our present international karate champion, and very fast boy, very strong, and he's been around a long time. He's got real fast hands and real fast kicking techniques.
So we're looking forward to having Norris on professional karate, too. And in the meantime, congratulations.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Beautiful job. Congratulations, Joe Lewis. And now, for Jim Harrison, this is Fred Everett for Professional Karate.
Joe, you've been around the American tournament karate scene almost from the beginning. Help us put this in perspective. We saw the quality of fighter, the tenacity, the strength, the blood and guts era from 1968. Let's fast forward to now. Help us put it in perspective.
Fundamentally, you have more fighters today. Therefore, you've got a much wider crop of top fighters. Back then, there were maybe 3, 4 guys in the entire nation that could give you a problem in a match. Today, there's probably 25 or 30 of them. So there's more top fighters, and then every now and then, one of those little hot shots in the second notch of fighters, second echelon, could come on and give you a good fight. Back in those days, there was 90% of them were always out of shape and terrible, and you had maybe 10% of them. Today, that second crop is bigger. I felt personally, in my own opinion, we put more focus on boldness back then, whereas today it's a little more focus on what we call flash and style. Back then it's a little more substance. You popped each other, knocked each other's teeth out, and you knocked each other out, as you saw on this tape here. You broke each other's ribs. Shake the guy's hand, no big deal. Now they want to throw you out of tournaments, what have you.
We even see fights among the parents in the tournaments. You know, so it's a very interesting contrast. On one hand, maybe their technical quality today is a little bit higher.
Oh, much higher.
But the spirit is so different, the very essence of the event. We were watching the World Championships and getting the sense that these were karate fighters using techniques that they firmly believed in. They actually referred to them as lethal blows, even with the open hand techniques. Yet today it is, as you imply, kind of a flashy pat-a-pat-pat type
Yeah, you
fight.
noticed on the tape, things were toned down. You scored a point. You didn't walk around shaking your hand and yelling at the audience and calling attention to the judges. Hey, look, I just scored a point. There wasn't that show. There wasn't that flash involved. Again, it's substance. Yes, today you see more combinations being thrown. You'll see more movement, more lateral motion going around. You'll see the hands higher because you see more higher kicking combinations, what have you. You won't find people in any better shape than you did in the old days, and you won't find any people today who are actually faster than there was in the old days. So the speed has remained the same. The size of the fighters you're seeing now today, you're seeing more of the bigger boys. The boys over 200 pounds are looking good. Back in those days, if you're over 200 pounds, you couldn't fight. If you're over 6'2" or 3", the tall guys didn't seem to hang in the tournaments. Today, it's a different ballgame. The fighters are becoming bigger. There's more of them. And the big thing is we have better teachers, more teachers, people who can speak the English, conceptualize what the heck's going on. Therefore, you have more better fighters.
Let's talk about the flip side. Is there more public interest in the sport than there was in 1968? Clearly, you said 1965 there was the Wide World of Sports debacle. Setting that aside, the people that attended these events, was it a bigger event? Did it have more prestige to it? I mean, we said earlier, I could not tell you who the top point fighter in the United States is or has been since the 80s.
And I don't even know who the current world champions are today, and this is my own sport, so it's one of the things. One of the things I like back in the old days, they always had a tournament queen. For example, the 2 days before this event, I had won the United States Karate Championships in Dallas, Texas, and the tournament queen turned out to be a girl who later starred on Simon & Simon, Jeannie Wilson. She was Miss Texas then. Today, you don't have that anymore.
Well, you had the tournament queen. You often had a senator, a local politician, a movie star.
Yeah, yes,
Elvis
yes.
Presley showing up. Bruce Lee was there.
I remember first national championships where I was the defending champion. Robert Culp from the I Spy series came as a guest. Bruce Lee came as a guest. As a matter of fact, that's where I met Bruce Lee for the first time, who later became my teacher. It was real hard getting national coverage on television at that time. Although sometimes you would go to a tournament, there would be 4,000 or 5,000 people in the audience. That's hard to get today. In 1971, I talked to John Martin, who was the president of ABC Wide World Sports at that time. He said, "Joe, I will go anywhere in the world and televise in your fights as long as it's not a karate tournament, as long as it was full contact." So that's what they wanted to see.
They want to see the crash.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, it's fascinating perspective. If you followed the sport through the years, this gives you a great contrast to what was a glorious time, the blood and guts era, the foundation, the pioneers. The spirit was strong, the technique was strong, the tenacity was there. That defined blood and guts. Joe Lewis, thanks so much for sharing your insights on this. It made a huge difference in how we view this. And again, thanks to Jim Harrison for donating this to the Martial Arts Professional Magazine archives. I'm John Graydon. I've enjoyed it. Thanks so much for viewing.